President, in pursuant to Standing Order 23.29, I lay on the table a report from the Economy and Infrastructure Committee on inquiry into the Commercial Passenger Vehicle Industry Act 2017, reforms including appendices, extract for proceedings and a minority report. I further present the transcripts of evidence, and I move that the transcripts of evidence lie on the table and a report be published.
The question is that the transcripts of evidence lie on the table and the report be published. That opinion say aye. Against no. I believe the ayes have it. Mr. Lasma.
President, I move that the Council take note of the report. And by doing so, Mr. President, it is my pleasure to table the report on the recent rideshare inquiry. The arrival of rideshare services has been the biggest change to the commercial passenger vehicle industry across the world recently. Public now expects safe, high-quality transport that is cheap and affordable. However, as it is essential to the viability of the industry that provides a good living to its drivers. Governments globally have found it difficult to balance these two demands. Parliament takes this issue very seriously, which is why we have supported 3 parliamentary inquiries over the past 3 years. I thank my parliamentary committee colleagues, Deputy Chair Mr. Bernie Finn, Mr. Mark Jebb, Mr. Rod Barton, Ms. Bev MacArthur, Ms. Sonia Terpstra and Mr. Tim Quilty, and all the participant members, who were always professional in their pursuit of a fair and equitable resolution for all parties to the inquiry. They also take ride-sharing very seriously. I'm grateful to everyone who participated to this inquiry. The committee received 315 submissions and heard from 21 witnesses across 3 public hearings. I understand how hard it was for some people to speak with us about their difficult financial circumstances. Their evidence was invaluable in helping the committee understand the complex issues surrounding the future of ride-sharing in Victoria. Therefore, on behalf of the committee, we sincerely thank you. And fellow members, on behalf of the committee, we sincerely thank them, and we understand that rideshare is here to stay. Nevertheless, the government still has an important role to play, and it remains committed to supporting a vibrant and sustainable commercial passenger vehicle sector that meets the needs of consumers and industry alike. And I hope that the recommendations included in this report help achieve this. And I would like, before I finish, Mr. President, to thank our Secretariat staff, Mr. Patrick O'Brien, Matt Newton, Alice Petrie, and Justin Donoghue for their administrative support and unending hard work during the course of this inquiry. I commend the report to Parliament.
Terpstra.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also rise to speak briefly on the tabling of the taxi inquiry report by Chair of the Planning and Environment Committee, Mr. Nazi Ellismar. There was much interest in this inquiry, and there were 315 written submissions made with a public hearing held on the 19th of June. I wish to acknowledge the contributions made by those members of our community who were affected by the changes brought about by the commercial passenger industry reforms. I also acknowledge the desire to see genuine reform of the industry, the need to assist those who operate in it and to have the best commercial passenger industry available to consumers. So I wish to acknowledge Mr. Barton, the member for Eastern Metropolitan Region, and his continued advocacy in this area as well. To the many drivers, owners, operators and family members who gave evidence at the inquiry, thank you very much for your contributions. To my fellow members who served on the inquiry, thank you for working constructively on this inquiry, and also to the Secretariat staff who assisted both myself and my colleagues who served on the inquiry. Thank you very much for your assistance and your efforts in producing the report. Thank you.
Mr. Barton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am pleased to be able to rise this afternoon and speak to the Economy and Infrastructure Committee's report and recommendation on the CPV reforms of 2017 and the needs of the industry moving forward. The past 12 months have been hugely successful in identifying the consequences of the taxi industry reform and the issues and needs of Victoria's commercial passenger vehicle industry as it grows and evolves. I certainly want to thank the committee and its staff for their time, interest and the incredible professional way this has all been handled. These recommendations open the opportunity to repair the past and pave a way for a viable and sustainable future for this industry. I do note with irony, some irony, that Uber last night lost its licence to operate in London because of its pattern of failures that put passenger safety at risk. It is not a fit and proper to hold a licence, says Transport for London. The Economy and Infrastructure Committee has engaged with the State Revenue Office, the Department of Transport, Commercial Passenger Vehicle Association and taxi industry, the Transport Workers Union, as well as having received over 300 submissions from struggling concerned groups and individuals. Many of the stories we have heard of the committee have been personal and heartbreaking. I certainly thank all of those who took the time to tell their story, the tales of how the reform has impacted families, which is still very raw and painful. I am proud to say that we now have an inquiry report that recognises the consequences of these reforms and set out a list of recommendations to improve the industry. This is the reason why I was elected to act on behalf of the taxi and hire car industry to get answers and resolutions for those who affected the commercial passenger vehicle reforms. And I thank everybody for giving me that opportunity to do so. But we do have a set of recommendations in this report that indicate a clear path forward and that I hope bring closure and some relief to those who have fallen victim to some of these changes. The Andrews Labor government now has the opportunity to enact change for the better for this industry, to recognise the struggle of those who are impacted and to create a viable, ethical, sustainable industry. I look forward to the prospect of working with the government to implement all of these reports' recommendations and return respect and pride to the commercial passenger vehicle industry.
Mr Finn.
Thank you, Mr President. I rise to speak on the inquiry into the report, the inquiry into the Commercial Passenger Vehicle Industry Act 2017 reforms as conducted by the Economy and Infrastructure Committee of the Legislative Council. And as the Deputy Chair of that committee, I commend my fellow members, in particular the Chair, Mr Elasma, on the way that the work was done on this inquiry and the effect that that work has had on the recommendations. Sadly, I have to support the minority report, and largely that is because this report, Mr President, is not as good as perhaps the last one we did on the ride-share industry. And Mr President, I'm sure you will remember there was bipartisan agreement in that report that led us to come to a common view that there were many people in the industry that had just not been given a fair go and deserved a much better go. That has not changed. This report will not change that, unfortunately. There are still many people in the community who are suffering as a result of their treatment by the government. Taxi operators in particular are suffering as a result of the way they have been treated by government, who has just gone ahead, done it pretty much the same way it does everything, like a bull at a gate, doesn't care about the impact or unintended consequences, and indeed a good many people have been run into the ground, and indeed some sadly and tragically have actually taken their own lives, and that is probably the greatest tragedy, well, it is certainly the greatest tragedy at all. So I support the minority report. I wish we could do more to help the people who are suffering as a result of the government's actions.
Mr Davis.
I can only, first of all, acknowledge the work of the members of the committee and particularly the Secretariat staff. This, of course, is, as Mr Finn pointed out, a reprise of an earlier report, and it is a weaker report, and that I think is unfortunate. Notwithstanding that, there are some useful recommendations that were agreed by all members of the committee, and that is valuable, but there are some major deficiencies in the majority report, and we sought to bring these out in the minority report. It's clear the transitional package was inadequate, and we do not believe that that has been addressed by the majority report. We do not believe that the fundamental tenet of much of the reform, which was to strip people of licences without proper compensation, was right. It's simply an evil act, and there is no other word for it. Reform by all standards, that's fine, and changes by all standards, that's fine too. But where a whole industry and people are at such behest of the government in this way, it is simply cruel and wrong to leave them without the proper compensation that they were entitled to feel and receive. The levy concerns me greatly. The government will use this levy to redirect and fund parts of the department, and that is not what the levy was intended for, and we have made that point very strongly too. As Mr Finn alluded to, the health impacts of these changes have been profound. There is no question that people have suffered tremendously at a family level, and some people have taken their lives. Now, I believe there should be a proper study to look at these matters. There should be a proper public health study to understand what has gone on and to make sure that proper services and support are in place in the longer haul. And that has not again been supported by the majority of the committee, and I for one think that that is deeply sad and wrong. I should say that the compensation matter does dominate, and we really do need a better way forward to ensure that people are still not left high and dry.
Thank you, Mr Davis. Any other? Mrs McArthur.
Mr President, I also rise to speak on the report moved by Chair Mr Elasma. I was very pleased to serve on the inquiry into the Commercial Passenger Vehicle Industry Act 2017 reforms. I greatly appreciated the contributions of all members of the committee, the Secretariat staff and the numerous contributors to the inquiry. Their stories were frequently heart-wrenching, and it was indeed very difficult often to understand how people could be suffering so much at the hands of a government. I must also support the minority report. The issues surrounding compensation, transition, the $1 levy and the ongoing health issues, even the rideshare industry itself, have not been properly dealt with. And I think it is, as Mr Davis has said, a need for further investigation and further inquiry. So I thank the members again, and I support the minority report.
Mr Chep.
Thank you, President, and I'm very pleased to rise to speak on the report on the inquiry into the Commercial Passenger Vehicle Industry Act 2017 reforms. And can I also begin by thanking all of the members of the committee for the work that we did collectively, particularly under Mr Elasma's stewardship, ably supported by Mr Finn as the deputy chair. And I particularly want to thank Mr Barton, who brought this inquiry to this place, and then the referral to the committee. And Mr Barton, of course, Mr Barton is of course, I can't believe, you know, this bloke just can't help himself, can he? He just can't help himself. It doesn't matter, this bloke just can't help himself, fair dinkum. But Mr Barton, notwithstanding that Mr Davis doesn't want me to pay attribution to the work that you brought to the committee, I will, because I think it's worthwhile that this place understand the expertise that you brought to this committee and was so invaluable in allowing us to understand completely the implications of the 2017 reforms, the changes to the industry that have been so obvious to all of us, I think, for the last couple of years, but also importantly, talking to us about the way forward and some of the recommendations and the way through some of the issues that still are apparent for people in the industry. So I wanted to pay particular thanks to you for that expertise that you brought to the table, and of course I want to pay a big thanks to the staff of the committee who did such tremendous work. Thank you.
Any more contributions? If not, I'll put the question that the council take note of the report, or their opinion say aye. Against no, I believe the ayes have it. Can I call Ms Pat